Welcome into Inside Carolina's Next Level YouTube show, where Greg Barnes and myself get together and sort of dig a little deeper or maybe go to the next level when talking about North Carolina sports. Of course, at Inside Carolina, we're always sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. And in this show, the first of our new year, and if you haven't listened to the last shows over the past 3 or 4 months, go check them out. Some cool stuff, some cool interviews that Greg and I did with various personalities across the sporting world. But in this show, being the first show of 2023, Greg, I'll let you sort of introduce what we're trying to accomplish here on a variety of levels, including the next level.
Yeah, Tommy, Happy New Year. I think the fact that we're less than a week in, I'm still saying 2022, and so that takes me as I get older, it takes me longer and longer to be able to adjust to the appropriate year. But before we get too far into the new year, we thought it would be wise and fun to kind of look back at the high points and the low points of 2022, and of course we're not looking at it as football and basketball seasons. We're looking at as just the calendar year. So kind of looking back into what happened last spring with the basketball team and the baseball team. And then, of course, what's happened since then in the fall and some of the other sports as well. So just wanted to kind of circle back and make sure we really kind of stamp 2022 before we turn full force into 2023. And with that being said, Tommy, we will take a look and maybe look at what are some opportunities ahead for North Carolina and football and basketball and the other sports coming up for this year.
Yep, and as we've mentioned before, if you've got any show ideas, certainly you can hit me up on Twitter, TAshleyIC, or Greg at InsideCarolina.com, email, or Tommy at InsideCarolina.com are always on the message boards over at Inside Carolina. Of course, premium subscriptions, don't forget that Johnny T-shirt deal. So join in on that. Even though we're live on YouTube, free for anybody to watch, there's plenty of content at Inside Carolina. And certainly, as Buck Sanders coined the phrase for us, there is no off season. So a lot going on. But let's look back. And so what we want to do, like Greg said, is sort of the highs, lows, and realistic expectations going forward. And Greg, let's get right into the 2022 highs. We'll start on a high note. The fifth high note, which I believe we both agree that Carolina's ACC baseball championship tournament win, certainly a big deal for Forbes's team and that program to get back on track and get back towards the top of a pretty good ACC baseball conference.
Yeah, for sure. And Scott Forbes being a relatively new guy, at least as a head coach at North Carolina, this was a big step for Scott. Everybody around the Carolina program, considering the success that Mike Fox had the last 20 years, everything's been defined by getting to Omaha in the College World Series. The way you do that is you have success in the ACC. And the ACC, along with the SEC, have been kind of the two powerhouse baseball conferences for a long time. So if you're able to win the ACC, that puts you in position to make a charge late in June out west. And North Carolina struggled a little bit early last year. They were trying to find their footing, and then just went on an incredible run. They won 15 of the last 17 going into the ACC tournament. That culminated with a impressive win over NC State in the ACC championship game, and that game was over quick. Vance Honeycutt won ACC tournament MVP honors, but Carolina was up 8-1 after a couple innings, and then went on to win 9-5. So number 5 on our list, Tommy, is Scott Forbes in the Diamond Hills winning the ACC baseball championship.
Yep, and you mentioned Vance Honeycutt, and look, much like Drake May, when you have one of the best players in the sport, you get a lot of press. And Vance Honeycutt, I've seen some pro mock drafts where he's one of the top, if not the top prospect coming out of college for next year. So Honeycutt, Forbes, and that Carolina crew, and look, they've got some talent. As always in college baseball, pitching will be key this year. But certainly winning that title gets Scott Forbes on the right track as North Carolina's head coach. Being the guy that replaced a legend, it's always tough.
Yeah, and you mentioned Honeycutt. The fact that he was one of only two guys at Division I level last year to hit 20 home runs and steal 20 bases. First kid in UNC program history to do it as well. So that speaks to his future potential, Tommy.
Yeah, he is different and a Salisbury native, so keeping the best in-state playing for the flagship university, it matters in all sports, especially Carolina baseball. Let's go number 4, Greg. I'll let you lead that one in because I think it's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think number 3 and number 4, not to tip our hand any, but the fact that North Carolina has had so many strong women coaches in the athletic department has just really kind of been a boon to UNC. And there's been a lot of success in the women's sports. But number 4 for us, of course, is the women's lacrosse national championship. I think when you consider that UNC has had several of these redemption stories, right? I mean, dating back, everybody knows about the 2017 national championship team, men's basketball. But in 2021, the women's lacrosse team fell in a heartbreaker to Boston College, and pretty much everybody came back because they wanted an opportunity to make amends and to really kind of finish the way they wanted to finish. And that's exactly what happened. North Carolina was able to beat Boston College first in the ACC tournament, and they scored 10 straight goals to kind of pull that one out. And then they go into the NCAA tournament and were able to beat Boston College in what was an incredible championship game. And for North Carolina to be able to win that title after what happened a year earlier is really a testament to what Jeannie Levy has done with that program.
Yeah, just looking at those, and we'll talk about more obviously coming up here, but women's sports at North Carolina is just ridiculous, and it gets overshadowed so much when you're talking about Carolina basketball and Roy Williams and Dean Smith, and the football team, maybe not as good on the field, but certainly overshadows a lot with all the money they bring in and all that. But women's sports is where it's at. Whether it's women's soccer, women's lacrosse, we'll get to field hockey to tip our hand a little bit. But it's just fascinating to watch how the whole coaching community at North Carolina, very few weak links. And when I say weak links, I mean uh, weak being short of a national championship because they always win national championships and they're always right there and just great coaches and great role models for everybody. One thing Carolina's always had is top shelf coaches across the board, and Jen Levy's certainly one of them. And number 3 on our highs for 2022, maybe the best at it, Karen Shelton and the women's field hockey team. And Greg, it certainly helps when you have one of the best to ever put them on, ever to put a uniform on, and Aaron Matson.
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about Karen Shelton, 25 ACC titles, 10 national championships. Uh, we talk a lot about Anson Dorrance and the amount of titles that he's won. Nobody nationwide is going to be able to match that type of performance. But man, you're talking about 10 national titles. That's right up there. So Karen Shelton, what an illustrious career. But you want to talk about an incredible season for North Carolina to win the way that they did, to go undefeated, beat Northwestern 2-1. And as you say, it's a testament. Erin Matson has had the career that she has to be able to win the game with a minute 19 left, and ultimately won that game 2-1 over Northwestern. And that's the way you want to go out, with your best player making the plays at the right time to be able to cap just an incredible season. The only bad news, of course, if you want to consider it that, is that 2 weeks later, Karen Shelton decided to announce her retirement after 42 years. What a phenomenal way to close it out! But just a great season for the women's field hockey team this year.
Yeah, I listened to an interview with Coach Shelton and Adam and Jones on the Carolina Insider podcast, and to listen to her talk about it. And one of the cool things she talked about, and folks, it's hard to believe it's been 25 years, but she talked about the interaction with Dean Smith when she got there and how that helped her. And yeah, and recruiting matters. And Aaron Matson, I mean, Greg, serious question. is there a more decorated college athlete than Aaron Matson in the country? And now COVID year helps because that gives you another year, but she cashed in on it, being the best player on an undefeated national championship team in that 5th year. 4 titles, players of the year every year. I mean, if there's a better college athlete that's ever existed in any sport, I'd like somebody watching this to point them out.
Yeah, there may be a name or two that are glaringly absent from our minds right now, just across the country. Uh, but it's going to be hard to top what she has done. Just a phenomenal. And again, the fact that she's able to win the game, the national championship game for Carolina, the way she did. I mean, not really a storybook ending. I mean, just because she has been so dominant as you laid out, you kind of expect her to do that kind of thing, and that's what the greats do, and she did. But just an incredible performance from her and the team. Uh, Before we move too far past Northwestern, who Carolina beat in the championship game, they were the number 3 seed. They were the defending national champions. So this is a program that was elite. They knew what they were doing. Carolina outshot them 15-2, and I don't think Northwestern even had a shot until maybe the fourth quarter.
Hmm.
Uh, so just dominant, pure
Yeah,
dominance.
yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll say about the women's lacrosse and the field hockey, and we'll get to the other women's sport this big time, is that stuff's hectic and it's exciting to watch. I've never been somebody that turned away from anything other than basketball and football, meaning I'll try to watch every sport you can and pay attention to all that stuff. But watching that field hockey team and that lacrosse team, it is pure hectic. And the cool thing about it is seeing somebody like Matson. She's done the poses with the Jordan poses, holding up the hands and all that stuff, but she delivers every single time. And I don't think people understand when you're talking about great players is the difficulty in delivering every time. I mean, she's done it. She's done it on a level. And North Carolina comes in at only 3 on our highs list. Probably not fair to them, but we've got a couple more that we'll talk about. I'm gonna move to number 2, and I'm a little bittersweet about this one, Greg, because I'm not sure how big a deal it is, but it was a big deal. Carolina wins the ACC Coastal in football with the win at Wake Forest on November 12th. Um, did the season end that day? I think it did. I think the season ended on November 12th.
Uh, the high points did for sure, right? Um, Look, football, as we've discussed, has not had the national success that a lot of these other sports have had. But football is the engine that keeps it all running. Football is the main revenue driver. It's the money that comes from football that's able to pay for field hockey and women's lacrosse and men's lacrosse and tennis and all these other sports. And it's the sport that brings in all the eyeballs. And so you need to be able to have success at football, especially the Power Five level, to be able to have the success that you have in all these other sports. And so that kind of elevates what North Carolina wants to do, and that's why there's so many eyes on the football program. But look, this is the second time in program history that North Carolina has played in the ACC championship game. Yes, it's only been around for a little bit less than 2 decades now, but Carolina has not won a ACC championship since 1980. So when you win the ACC Coastal Division and you have an opportunity to play for the ACC championship, as Carolina did in early December against Clemson, that is a big deal, and that is a milestone moment to have that opportunity to be 60 minutes away from an ACC crown. That's such a really big deal. And the crazy thing is, Tom, is when they beat Wake Forest on November 12th, Carolina moved to 9-1, 6-0 in the conference. If they had closed the season with wins over Georgia Tech and NC State, they very well could have been playing for a college football playoff berth against Clemson and Charlotte. We know how things played out, but the fact that Carolina clinched the division as early as they did really had aspirations and dreams at a level that we really haven't seen around North Carolina except for a handful of times. And so I think that was a big accomplishment for North Carolina. Yes, the season did not end the way anybody hoped it would with four consecutive losses, but certainly a building block type of season for Mac Brown.
Yeah, I mean, to be in the building, at App, at Wake, at Duke, to see those games play out and to see the legend that is now Drake May being born. Wake Forest was another one of those, and it was always fascinating to me, especially the Wake Forest game, to see a guy like Sam Hartman, who was always so great for Wake Forest, and he would find a way to melt down against North Carolina. And he did it by making a bad throw there at the end that Cam Kelly, of all people, intercepted. Cam Kelly could have potentially made a lot of money against Sam Hartman in Wake Forest. We'll see how that plays out, but certainly it's as high as it gets, like you mentioned, for football. After that Wake Forest game, the picture with Josh Downs holding the trophy and the man in the arena feel to it and all that stuff. I mean, that's where it was at on November 12th. I think we might revisit this football team a little bit later in this show. Greg, number one's easy. I bet you everybody watching this knows what number one is, and we sort of made it a dual number one, but I don't think anybody will ever forget the win at Cameron and the win in the Final Four over the Duke Blue Devils.
Yeah, I think the question, Tommy, is, and I'd love to hear back from people who are watching this. Uh, which game was more important to you? Because clearly North Carolina Duke Final Four never happened before, and such incredible hype for that game, and the fact that the teams actually played to that hype and maybe even beyond uh, is phenomenal. But to be able to go into Cameron with all the hoopla surrounding Coach K's final celebration, I mean, that was his retirement party. And to spoil it the way that Carolina did, wow, just two incredible performances. Uh, Carolina didn't close out the year, didn't really have the year that everybody thought maybe they could. But to have those two notches on your belt uh, may not be the same as the national championship, but it is as close to a national championship as you can get. And uh, I would be curious to see if anybody thinks the win at Cameron kind of holds a special place more so than the Final Four. I doubt it, but I think you can make the argument.
Mm, I don't know. It'd be like picking which child's your favorite, right?
Right.
Um, I will say this: I've been in Cameron for Duke Carolina. Was not in Cameron for that one. Um, and that environment's nuts. I can't imagine what it was like for K's last game. I mean, you know how it is in there, and you know how it was in there. But the Final Four, and I say this as a college basketball fan, not necessarily covering North Carolina or whatever the feelings are. It gives me chill bumps thinking about that Final Four atmosphere. And there'll come a time where there were 250,000 people in that building talking about it. But I will say this: and shout out to Dewey Burke for hooking the Ashley family up. But being in that building during that Final Four, I've never experienced anything more stressful watching a sport. Never. Because how it's turned out, I mean, that's the rivalry. The rivalry ended that day um, for all intents and purposes, simply because short of winning in the national championship, you can't top it. And so Carolina fans will have that. That's why that game and the Cameron game are our highs. Um, I don't think anybody will debate what's number one on our list. But to Greg's point, get in the thread, get on Twitter, wherever you want to be. Which game was bigger for you personally as a Carolina fan watching this and watching those games? Beating Krzyzewski in Cameron to close the door on that chapter, or closing the final door in the Final Four? Yeah, it's crazy. Greg, we got a few honorable mentions for our list that didn't quite make it. I'll let you knock them out.
Yeah, well, I think it speaks volumes about the UNC athletic department when we have legitimate honorable mentions, and there's just so much success across the athletic department where we can talk about national championships and ultimate frisbee. We can talk about a women's tennis indoor national title. I mean, these are national titles, and we're talking about them as honorable mentions. And then, of course, With me being the golf guy I am, Tommy, Austin Greaser, the success that he had, getting to the finals of the U.S. Am, and then being able to play in the Masters last year, and having success and making the cut at the U.S. Open. I mean, that's phenomenal, and the job that the men's golf team has done the last couple of years and continues to do has just been incredible. But a lot of success this past year, as it is pretty much every year for UNC athletics, and it's well, we need probably a top 10, Tommy, to get in all the worthy applicants.
Absolutely. We could go on and on and on. And we're going to go a lot longer than we normally go on this show. It's usually a 30-minute show, and we're already at 20 minutes or so. But we're getting into the lows, and we'll probably keep these a little bit shorter simply because these are the type of things you don't want to talk about a lot. Lows for 2020. Greg, we agreed. Giving up 40 points in a football quarter at Appalachian State. It was funny to me to hear them talk on the college football playoff about how crazy the third quarter was for TCU Michigan. And I was like, man, they ain't played nothing yet. They hadn't even scored any points. 40 points. Carolina did that to one team or gave that to one team. Uh, Certainly a sign of things to come, Greg.
It was. We had a little bit of a heads up with the Florida A&M game to open the year that, okay, this defense has not made the improvements that maybe we thought they would in the offseason. But yeah, when you give up a school record 40 points in a quarter, and it being the fourth quarter, that's not a good point to celebrate. I mean, the record for most points in a half that UNC has allowed in program history is 45. They allowed 40 in the fourth quarter to App State. Just a couple numbers that really kind of stick out. App State scored touchdowns on all 6 possessions in the fourth quarter, averaged 6.7 points per possession, ran 30 plays for 323 yards. That's 10.8 yards per play in the fourth quarter. I mean, there's a lot of Mac Brown defenses back in 96, 97 that didn't sniff giving up that kind of yardage for the entire game. App State was 0 for 2 on third downs in the fourth quarter, which is kind of a crazy stat to me. And they only forced 1 turnover. So it was it was something to behold, Tommy. Teams combined for 62 points in the first 3 quarters, and then combined for 62 points in that fourth quarter alone.
I have not gone back to watch it on video because I was there front row of that end zone where all the action happened for App State and, of course, the 2-point conversions. I still don't understand what happened. Like, how could that happen that they gave up 30 plays for 323 yards and 40 points? Yeah, sign of things to come. It was never quite that bad, but North Carolina really didn't get a ton better off of that. So I know Mac will disagree, but the numbers, the stats, and the analytics generally don't lie. You love them, Greg, and you preached it all through the season, and that'll lead us later in this list. Let's get to it because we're going to talk about later in the list because I think it's relevant. But let's go ahead and move on to the fourth low point. And gosh, this could have happened twice given what happened on December 30th this year. But that Pitt loss in basketball is on our list where Carolina gets beat at home. And the season's pretty much, folks think the season's done. Now, it's on our list of lows, but maybe it should have been on the list of turning points if we did that. Your take on that loss, because it was absolutely brutal when it happened.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Tommy. And North Carolina had been playing better up to that February 16th game against Pitt at the Smith Center. But that turned quickly. I mean, some of the stats there, Carolina came up with stops on 12 of Pitt's first 16 possessions of the second half, and yet still trailed by 21 points with 10 minutes to play. And it was a Q4 loss. And that's kind of what Carolina had done last year. They had gotten beaten badly by some really good teams, but had avoided any bad losses. And this is really the stamp of a bad loss. Pittsburgh, of course, ended up winning the game 76-67. A very poor Panthers team. Carolina just really had no interest in being there. And coming out of that game, North Carolina was on the wrong side of the bubble, and very easily you could have missed the NCAA tournament had they not won at Cameron, like we talked about a little while ago. And so that was the low point of the first year of Hubert Davis, and give Hubert credit, because after that he really got on his guys, turned from being a friendly coach to kind of a fiery coach, and it kind of caught the guys' attention. And as you said, it really proved to be a turning point for the team as well.
Yeah, I mean, something's flipped there, and a lot of folks have said it wasn't lightning in a bottle, and um, it certainly looks like it when you look at what happened before that and what's happened since. Our our discussion of the Final Four. So it'll be interesting to see. We'll talk about what lies ahead for that program here in a few moments. But I'm going to switch this now. You send me a list. I'm going to switch it because I think I'm going to put State at the third low. NC State football loss. Carolina gets to 9-1 like we talked about, and I'm making an executive decision. So correct me if I'm wrong, Greg. But um, Carolina gets to 9-1. The sky's the limit for this college team, for this college football program. Mac Brown's got it right where he wants. There are flaws, obviously, but it doesn't matter. You win, and then Georgia Tech happens, and then they compound the Georgia Tech loss by losing to NC State in Keenan on senior day, or whatever you want to call it these days with all the different eligibility and COVID years. But just an absolute brutal, brutal thing. It was almost like Carolina football rested their starters against Georgia Tech and NC State. That's what it felt like. Obviously, they did not, but they still managed to lose to NC State. Greg, bad loss.
It was, and as you mentioned, Carolina was a 21-point favorite against Georgia Tech, and really you just fumbled that game away. Georgia Tech was horrible offensively, solid defensively, but not great, and we're down to their fourth string quarterback, and won that game. And so when you combine what happened the week prior with the disaster that happened at Carter Finley back in 2021, where Carolina had a 9-point lead with 2 minutes to play and somehow loses that game in regulation. Every reason was available for North Carolina to be focused and on task and to really handle Dave Doran and his Wolfpack. And it just did not happen. NC State had struggled offensively all year long, and as the season went along, they kept losing quarterbacks. And so you get Ben Finley gets the start, fourth string guy, and just makes a few big plays. And North Carolina's offense struggled. State's defense is probably the best that they've played all year long. And even then, North Carolina, Drake May has a phenomenal close of the game with that big pass play in the end zone, Antoine Green, to force overtime. And I think at that point, everybody thought, okay, rough first 60 minutes, but Carolina got it to overtime. They've got the momentum. They're in good shape. And then the offense stalls yet again. And then Noah Burnett misses somewhat of a chip shot of a field goal that allows State to pull out a 30-27 win. And that really started the free fall for North Carolina after that Georgia Tech loss. Just a really bad taste left in the mouth of, I think, all Carolina fans.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about special teams not nearly enough, and the value of good kickers. And Noah Burnett missed it, and he just did. And nobody feels worse than he does. But he was there, and it was his job to make it, and couldn't get it done. Carolina, of course, has since gone out and gotten a portal kicker. We'll see how that goes. Coe from Cincinnati, I believe. But you got to make kicks. And Noah Ruggles got sent on from North Carolina because he couldn't make kicks in a big overtime game at Virginia Tech. And then we see what happens in the national championship. Little bit different, or in the finals or the playoffs. A little bit different situation, but nevertheless, good kickers win games. Field goal kicking in college especially is underrated, and you got to be good at it. Carolina loses to NC State, goes on to lose to Clemson, and then we saw the Oregon game. We'll talk about that in just a second. So a flipped State with the women's soccer loss. We talk about national championship games. We can talk about 2016 Chris Jenkins hitting the shot. Um, that was brutal. But I don't know if I've seen too many brutal ways to lose for Anson Dorrance and the women's national champion or the women's, you know, umpteen time national championship program to lose the way they did to UCLA, giving up the tying goal with 16 seconds left. It doesn't get much more brutal than that. Jenkins, yes, but not much worse than the way Anson Dorrance's team lost to end the season.
Yeah, and the fact that North Carolina was so dominant in that game for the first 80 minutes. I mean, there was no doubt they were the best team there, up 2-zip, and really just kind of dominated time of possession up until that point. And you're just kind of trying to run out the clock, basically. And then UCLA has some life with that score within, I guess, 9 minutes to play. And then, of course, there's question about was there interference with the goalie on the corner kick and those types of things, which are legitimate questions. But for UCLA to score, as you say, 16 seconds left, basically, to force overtime and then win in overtime, just a surprising defeat, kind of a demoralizing defeat. And just because, as we'll talk about in a minute with the basketball team, UNC was in position to win, and they should have won that game. And then just some fluky turns of events, and it really, Tommy, to me, speaks about the importance of momentum. When things are going your way, you're solid, you're focused, you're concentrated, you're confident, and then once that momentum shifts, all that confidence and kind of slips away, and anxiety comes in, and the other team all of a sudden has that confidence. And it doesn't matter what sport it is; it's every single sport. Once that momentum changes, it's hard to get it back. And UCLA was able to capitalize on that, and just a kind of a crushing defeat for a Carolina program, as you mentioned, that's had so much success at the national level in women's soccer.
Yeah, I mean, Anson Dorrance's record speaks for itself. They haven't won the Natty since 12, and it's right there on the doorstep. And one thing I think folks overlook, and you can certainly see it with the basketball side and definitely in football, it's hard to get there. So when you get there and you literally can touch the trophy with your fingertips and have it ripped away, brutal, just absolutely brutal. But credit UCLA. I mean, regardless of what you think happened with the goalie, and that was bad, that corner kick was elite. Like one of the greatest corner kicks given the situation that we've seen. We see about what the world thinks about soccer with the World Cup that we just watched. Um, I didn't see a corner kick that matched that one during the World Cup. I mean, just absolutely unbelievable for UCLA. So Carolina loses that, leads us to their number one low. And Greg, I'm a little torn on this one as well because, quite frankly, I don't remember it very much after the game we've already talked about. Carolina up 15 and up 16 actually, but up 15 at halftime at the national championship against Kansas, and it just all falls apart in rapid fashion.
It does, and the fact that this is the number one low, I think we need to qualify that a little bit. That North Carolina was in the national championship game is a shock to everybody. Nobody thought they would be there, especially after the Pitt game that we just talked about. But for North Carolina to play as well as it did in the first half of that game, to have a 15-point lead at halftime, North Carolina should have won the national championship. And had it not been for Armando Bacot hurting his ankle again, and I mean, give him a ton of credit. I mean, he was hobbled, he was hurting, he was grimacing with every single step, and he gutted it out as best he could. But if he's healthy, I don't think there's any question that that Carolina wins. But because he got banged up, because Kansas went on such a run out of the gate, coming out of halftime, it just made it a difficult task for North Carolina. After Caleb Love's success against Duke, in which he was able to hit the game winner, ultimately over Mark Williams, a shot that will go down in Carolina infamy. He missed a shot there at the buzzer that could have potentially forced overtime, and that's it. So what would have been the ultimate Cinderella storybook ending for North Carolina, kind of fell just short. And so, because of that, we've got to put that at the number one low of the year. Again, it's not like the Pitt game where they were just horrible or anything like that. They were just so close to such a fantastic finish. And it just kind of slipped through their fingers due to injury and a great rally from Kansas.
Yeah, and that was the story of Carolina basketball in a nutshell. Last season, right there in New Orleans in the Final Four, could be great, could be great for a half, and then could fall apart. Carolina get I agree with you. If Carolina and God, how many times over the course of Carolina basketball history, probably every other team as well, but just seems so more injuries. Injuries derail what should have been a national championship season. We've seen it forever. I first remember it in '77. Uh,
1984, 2012. Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing.
it is, and like I said, winning national championships is hard. And when your floor is a national championship, when you have it right there in front of you, it's certainly tough. So highs and lows for 2022 on the Next Level show. If you forgot them, go back and listen to them again and debate them on the message boards. Debate them with Greg and I. You know, it, I don't think you can debate the high. I don't think you can debate the low, but certainly we're up for discussion. But Greg, let's turn this. And again, this is Next Level with Greg Barnes and Tommy Ashley. A little bit longer today, so appreciate you staying with us. Realistic expectations here in 2023. Carolina's coming off a win over Wake Forest in basketball after another loss to Pitt, even though that loss to Pitt to end 2022 is probably a good loss, quote unquote, when all is said and done. But let's talk about the basketball team first. Realistic expectations here. I question whether it's a tournament team at this time. You said after the Pitt loss that you felt like they certainly were. What's realistic for this team, you think?
Yeah, I think it's really going to depend on how well the bench comes along. I think Seth Trimble showed against Wake Forest that he's a guy that's making strides. I think they need to get Puff Thomas back in kind of the Puff Thomas, Puff Johnson.
I like
Uh, Dating myself a little bit there, Tommy. Um, Kind of get him back in the flow of things. And I think the fact that the Leaky Black had the game that he did against the Demon Deacons gives you some optimism that hey, maybe he can provide you some point outburst on occasion when you need it. I think the trouble for this team is while RJ Davis had a really good second half against the Demon Deacons, Caleb Love really kind of continues to struggle. When he's on, he's really good. When he's not, he's somewhat of a liability. And we've seen that more often than not this year. I mean, talking about the title game last year, he missed 19 shots in the title game. And so you have to balance the good Caleb with the bad Caleb. And that's the challenge. And I think you have to be willing to kind of put him on the bench when he's struggling and let some of these other guys step in. And if that happens, I think there's enough depth here where Carolina can settle things out. And are we talking about a 1 or a 2 seed? I don't think so. I don't think this team is at that level. But I think this team is good enough, given the status of the ACC, to potentially be a 4 or 5 seed, and maybe a 6 seed. But that gets them into the tournament and it gives them an opportunity to kind of build momentum and maybe get hot. But I think that's ultimately, I think a Sweet 16 would be a very good season for this team. I know that's not what people are expecting, but just how this team has played through 15 games, I think that's probably a realistic expectation for what this basketball team can accomplish this year.
Yeah, I mean, they were an 8 seed for a reason last year,
Right.
and, they got hot for a month, and season's long, that opportunity's still out there. Carolina plays Notre Dame on Saturday at 11:30 in the morning in Smith Center. I mean, these game times are ridiculous, but, I think what we saw from Trimble at least provides Hubert Davis an opportunity or a reasonable piece to sort of settle Caleb down at times. Now, Caleb still played 38 minutes the other night, and Hubert's often talked about the bench being a motivator and things like that. We haven't seen it, but hey, the thing about Caleb Love is, and I said it with Dewey Burke on the post game, and if you hadn't listened to that, go check out Dewey's comments. He can be really, 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 really good. He's just got to figure out how to make the really bad not hurting the team. and that's what you mentioned earlier. So, basketball, 6, 7 seed, get in there, see what happens. But they've got work to do, and folks need to stay healthy, as we've seen. Football, a lot of new faces starting class in North Carolina on, I guess, Monday, January 9th. I think Max said 19 players last time we talked to him, maybe 20 by now. Who knows what else is left with the portal and attrition and all that? The window closes later this month or in the middle of the month. But, Greg, I've said forever that Carolina is an 8-win program. You're not going to get me off of that, but you may be able to get me up to a 9-win program, given how the schedule's now 12 games. Where are you? Realistic expectations for Mac Brown, and not just realistic, expected results for Mac Brown this year. It's year 5. Recruiting is not an issue. Talent is no longer an issue. What do you want to see when we're doing this show next year? What do you want to see have happened for Mac's program?
Yeah, I think you're right about North Carolina being an 8-win program typically during good years. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what you want to be able to see with Mac Brown recruiting at the level he is to be able to uh, be consistent with that. But then when the roster works in your favor, as it will in 2023, to capitalize on it and maybe make I don't want to say a miracle run, but maybe win some games you weren't expected to win and maybe get to 10 wins or even 11 wins. I mean, TCU's playing for the national championship, and that's not a team that really is ever in that conversation.
And they were
But
5-7 last year.
yeah, everything worked in their favor this year. And because they were good enough at certain spots, especially quarterback, it worked out for them. North Carolina is going to have a kid back in Drake May who's going to be a legitimate Heisman candidate once again. Him and Caleb Williams will probably be the top 2 guys going into the season. There's a lot of veteran pieces. Carolina has 3 top 10 recruiting classes that have come in. All those guys have at least a year under their belt. That first top 15 class, they're 4th-year guys. It is time to play out. It is time to play to your potential. And then, as you mentioned, Tommy, when you bring in another solid recruiting class and you add 8 transfers through the portal, by having your roughly 20 new guys on the roster in the spring, combined with the guys you have coming back, there should be no reason whatsoever for there not to be physical, hard tackling practices. You get 15 in the spring, make them count. Beat each other up, because if you're talking about lack of physicality along the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, you address that by getting after one another all the time. Forget about injuries. You can deal with that in the offseason, in the summer months. Really be physical, really hit hard, and set that standard in spring ball so that when you get to training camp, if you need to loosen up a little bit, you can, to make sure guys stay healthy. But there's no reason for this team to go into the season having issues along the line of scrimmage the way that they have the last couple of years, especially on the defensive side of the ball. With the talent in place, there is no reason for this program not to challenge for the ACC title once again. Everything works in their favor as I laid out. Drake May will be gone after next year. A lot of key pieces will be gone after next year. So every reason to expect a little bit of a drop off in 2024, which is why year 5 has got to be the year that Mac Brown and this program take that next step to double-digit wins.
Indeed, no excuses. Schedules, I don't know if the schedule's harder, but Clemson's on it, so people assume it's harder. And Minnesota's not bad. In South Carolina, we've seen them. I mean, they can be good or they can be terrible. Here's what I want to see. I want to see less highlight tapes and more working tapes. I've been on this, and I think it matters. And this is my request. So if anybody's listening and they want to know what the fan base wants to see, get rid of the highlight stuff and show the work. The fourth quarter videos for Clemson and South Carolina, I'll go back to them. They're in the gym, they're in the weight room, they're busting each other in the mouth, they're working, and it translates. Carolina shows a highlight tape. Randy Clements, the new offensive line coach, who we agree is different. He's not a traditional Carolina guy. He said Anybody can make a highlight tape. I want to see what they've got inside of them. That's what Matt Brown needs to figure out. That's what this team needs to figure out. Physicality should not be an issue. And to your point, Greg, they need to get after it in spring, go all out. If somebody gets hurt, they just get hurt. But if people get injured and they're more physical in the fall, it was worth it. And that's how it works in football. Low man wins, right? Or you get knocked off, and Carolina has an opportunity. Drake May's going to be a Heisman candidate. Don't waste him. Greg Barnes, anything left as we close this sort of review and look ahead next level? It's been fun. We got some other things coming up in the new year, but what sayeth you?
Yeah, we got some overtime action going on here, Tommy. This is the longest next level we've ever done.
Oh, yeah, 45, 46 minutes. Yeah, we appreciate folks paying attention and listening. Debate it on the message boards. Do whatever you want. Shout out to us for any any topics you want, any guests you want, anything like that. We're open. Greg Barnes and I can do anything we want, short of just going completely off the rails here at Next Level, InsideCarolina.com's YouTube show. That's Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's been Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com sponsoring us. We'll talk to you guys soon.